You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instinctively scan for the exits? Not because you're afraid, just because that's what you've always done. Or when something breaks, a relationship, a plan, a piece of technology, and instead of panicking, you go quiet. You assess. You adapt. You don't expect rescue. You never really have. You learned early that the world shifts without warning, that security is temporary, that adults don't always have answers. So you built something internal, a kind of steady center, a self-reliance that feels less like confidence and more like necessity. Most people don't notice this about you. They might call you independent, or distant, or practical. They might say you're emotionally reserved, hard to read, sometimes even cynical. But that interpretation misses something deeper. Because what looks like detachment is often pattern recognition. What looks like skepticism is often experience. And what looks like emotional restraint is often a nervous system that learned very early not to overreact to instability. This is the psychology of Generation X, those born roughly between 1960 and 1980, and it's rarely explained in a way that actually feels accurate. There's more going on here than people realize. Gen X grew up in a specific psychological climate: rising divorce rates, economic recessions, corporate layoffs, the Cold War, shifting cultural norms, the early digital revolution. It was a time when institutions felt less solid than they had for previous generations. Research in developmental psychology tells us something important. Children don't just absorb what parents say. They absorb the emotional tone of the era around them. When stability feels uncertain, the nervous system adapts. Neuroscience shows that repeated exposure to unpredictability can increase sensitivity to environmental change. The brain becomes efficient at scanning for risk. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and problem solving, often becomes highly active. You learn to anticipate, to prepare, to not be caught off guard. This doesn't mean trauma in a dramatic sense. It means adaptation. Many Gen X children came home to empty houses after school. Latchkey kids, they were called. It wasn't necessarily neglect, it was circumstance. 2 working parents, long commutes, an economy that required more. But from a nervous system perspective, repeated early independence wires something specific. Self-sufficiency becomes default. When no one is there to immediately regulate your emotions, you learn to regulate them yourself. When problems arise and adults are unavailable, you solve them. When institutions feel unreliable, you rely inward. Over time, this creates a psychological signature: low tolerance for drama, high tolerance for responsibility. You don't expect the system to save you. You don't expect trends to last. You don't assume authority is competent. And you don't panic when structures change. That's not coldness. That's calibration. Behavioral science also shows that people raised in transitional eras often develop what's called adaptive skepticism. You don't reject new ideas outright, but you don't fully trust them either. You wait. You observe. You look for patterns before committing. This is why Gen X often appears quieter than the generations before and after. Less publicly reactive, less performative, more observational. You grew up before constant digital validation, before every thought required documentation, before outrage was monetized. So your emotional processing stayed more internal. And here's where it gets interesting. This self-reliance, this internal steadiness, is both a strength and a cost. The strength is obvious. You are difficult to destabilize. You've lived through cultural shifts, economic resets, technological revolutions. You've reinvented yourself more than once. You don't cling tightly to one identity because you've seen how quickly contexts change. but the cost is quieter. When you learn early that you can't rely too heavily on external structures, you may also struggle to fully lean on people. Not because you don't care, but because dependency feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. Attachment research shows that children who experience early emotional independence often develop what psychologists call earned autonomy. You function exceptionally well alone, but asking for help may feel unnatural. Vulnerability may feel inefficient. You might find yourself being the steady one in relationships, the rational one, the one who doesn't overreact. And sometimes you wonder why other people seem more emotionally expressive, more openly needy, more comfortable expecting support. It's not that you don't have needs. It's that your nervous system learned not to expect them to be consistently met. That subtle difference shapes everything. Society sometimes labels Gen X as cynical or emotionally muted. But cynicism is often misinterpreted discernment. And emotional restraint is often disciplined regulation. This isn't better or worse than other generational patterns. Millennials were shaped by economic instability in a different developmental window. Gen Z grew up in constant digital exposure. Boomers experienced post-war expansion and institutional trust. Each generation adapts to its era. None are superior. None are deficient. They are context-specific nervous systems responding to different environmental signals. But here's the paradox. Because Gen X learned not to rely too heavily on institutions, you also became uniquely adaptable to their collapse. Because you never assumed permanence, you're rarely shocked by impermanence. Because you learned to entertain yourself, self-soothe, and self-direct, you carry a quiet resilience that doesn't require applause. Yet sometimes that same resilience can make you invisible. You don't demand recognition. You don't dramatize struggle. You handle things. And in doing so, people may underestimate the weight you've carried. The neuroscience of stress adaptation tells us that long-term resilience doesn't always look dramatic. Often it looks like calm, like competence, like dry humor in the face of absurdity. It looks like you. There's also a hidden strength here that's rarely acknowledged: psychological flexibility. Growing up analog and transitioning into digital adulthood required constant cognitive updating. Your brain had to learn new systems repeatedly. From rotary phones to smartphones. From physical offices to remote work. From cassette tapes to streaming algorithms. Cognitive science calls this adaptive plasticity. The ability to rewire without losing core identity. That's not small. And still, beneath all that adaptability, there may be a quiet longing. Not for rescue, but for reliability. Not for attention, but for steadiness that isn't self-generated. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Nothing about this pattern means you're emotionally closed, or distant, or cynical by nature. It means your nervous system learned early that stability isn't guaranteed, so you became your own. And that makes sense. You are not broken for being steady. You are not detached for being discerning. You are not cold for being composed. You were shaped by an era that required internal strength. And if parts of this feel familiar, there's more beneath the surface. Especially when it comes to how this generation loves, trusts, and chooses partnership. But that's a quieter layer. And we can explore that next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below.